Hello, this is part 2 of mine, Megan Benjegerdes-Wiegreffe's copyright assignment, the Assure model presentation. The A of the Assure model is for Analyze Learners. The first subsection of Analyze is to analyze the general characteristics of learners. Our students are in the 9th grade, and we can assume that they have the general associated background knowledge and skills that most 9th graders have. The specific entry competencies of our students is that they are digital natives, so they know how to use computers and web browsers and can safely navigate the internet. We can assume that they have some exposure to copyright, so they have at least heard the term copyright. We need to also address any learning differences or needs our students may have. We can assume that our hypothetical student population is similar to a regular high school population, and there is a large number of kinesthetic learners who need to get up and move to be engaged in their learning. We can also assume that our hypothetical student population contains students of differing abilities. So, to address the different needs of students, students will be grouped differentially, with stronger students assisting the students that are weaker academically. The first S of the Assure model is State Standards and Objectives. The most applicable standards to this lesson are the International Society for Technology and Education Standards for Students and the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. ISTE Standard 6B states students will create original works or responsibly repurpose or remix digital resources into new creations. TEKS for the 9th grade ELA and Reading 11H state that students will display academic citations, including for paraphrased and quoted text, and use source materials ethically to avoid plagiarism. The objective for this lesson is that students will define copyright law and its components of fair use and public domain, and demonstrate their understanding by gaining an achievement rating of satisfactory or higher in the following specific objectives on their rubric: categorizing as a group a selection of resources as copyrighted or public domain, and identify independently if a resource was used appropriately according to fair use guidelines. These objectives also incorporate the ABCD objective checklist. The A is audience. Our audience is 9th grade students. The B stands for behaviors. Our behaviors are defining, demonstrating, categorizing, and identifying. The C stands for conditions. Conditions are referenced in the selection of resources and how the activity will be completed, either individually or as a group. The D stands for degree of the objective for students to achieve a rating of satisfactory or higher on the rubric. The second S in the Assure model is for select strategies and resources. The most appropriate strategies to convey and measure information are a PowerPoint to deliver the information, a supplemental flowchart or infographic handout for students to refer for information, a group activity for students to practice differentiating between copyright and public domain, and an individual activity for students to practice identifying if resources were used appropriately according to fair use guidelines. When selecting resources, the resources at copyright.gov for information about copyright were excellent. A Velcro T-chart and selection of resources for students to sort was selected for the group activity. And giant Post-its, a selection of resources for students to discuss, and different colors and types of writing utensils so that students' responses can be identified in the individual activity. When selecting, modifying, or designing materials, the teacher to librarian created the PowerPoint, and the teacher will create a flowchart or infographic and specific activities. The U in the Assure model stands for Utilize Resources. This includes previewing resources, preparing the environment, preparing the learners, and providing the learning experience. Previewing the resources included extensive research at copyright.gov. Preparing the resources utilized the research to create the student resources. Preparing the environment involves gathering the necessary materials and arranging the library to accommodate the different activities of the lesson. To prepare the learners, the teacher, Mrs. Stewart, will explain her assignment and introduce the term copyright in her class. Finally, the learning experience will be provided to the learners in the library by presenting the PowerPoint to the students and providing the supplies and instructions for activities. The R in the Assure model represents the requirement for learner participation. For practice, students will participate in 2 activities. The first activity is a group activity. Students will work in groups to categorize a pre-selected pool of resources as copyrighted or public domain and attach the example resources to a Velcro T-chart. The second activity is an individual activity where students will work independently to complete a gallery walk. In the gallery walk, the students will vote whether a hypothetical resource was used appropriately according to fair use guidelines and explain their reasoning. Students will each have a unique writing utensil so that the educator can track which student writes which response. For feedback in the group activity, the teacher and teacher librarian will check each group's T-chart and discuss correct answers and correct any errors. For the individual activity, the educators will call on students according to the type and color of the written response and ask them to explain their response. The E of the Assure model stands for Evaluate and Revise. During the lesson, the educators will observe students, conduct formative assessments, and reteach concepts as necessary. After completing the lesson, activities, and rubrics for each student, the educators will analyze the data and adjust the lesson as necessary. By following each of these steps in the Assure model, hopefully our students will receive an excellent lesson and learn all about copyright.